Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be in class again with you today, although virtually. But I'm always happy to see you all in class, and I hope that at the end of today you still find value as you normally would after every class. So, welcome. This week we're going to be talking about public relations and community engagement. So, welcome. And but before we get right into this, we're going to talk about our campaign presentations. So, we did last week talk about having student advertising campaigns, and you're going to have your presentation and feedback session, an opportunity for each group to present their cultural advertising campaign. The criteria for evaluation would be for us to check out if each of the presentations have cultural authenticity. That is, are they real? Are they really depicting what the Yoruba or the Igbo would do, for example? Or are they just formulating things that aren't true? So we want to look out for such cultural authenticity, respectful, accurate representation of what the culture does. All right, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're going to look at for evidence of strategic thinking that has been deployed to the work. So, have they shown a good understanding of who their audience is, the objectives for which this assignment was given in the first place? So, feel free to share your work. I'm going to share with you what the objectives are and what your focus should be when you're giving the feedback to your mates. And keep in mind that I really do want everybody to feel comfortable to share their work. Last time that we tried it, we did find a lot of insightful work, and it did make me happy to see the level of creativity that you all take on when you do this work. So kudos to you all, and please enjoy the presentations. As you watch them or as you review them, pay attention to what has really made each of the presentations successful and begin to think of how to apply them to professional content creation. Remember that this is actually a bridge to advertising applications. And most important of all, I would like to celebrate you for your creativity, and I want you all to do the same. In which case, as you review the presentations, make sure that the people who have done well are well celebrated. I want to believe that all the groups have done well. So celebrate creativity, celebrate cultural knowledge, so that everyone feels happy that they've gotten involved in this exercise. So let's talk about the objectives. We wanted to see and would like to see how creatively you executed the task, each of the groups. We want to see that you've been able to deploy cultural elements for the particular culture that you're representing, right? Then we want to see the professional quality. I'm not so much about the production quality, where that could be it. As you go on, you also want to pay attention to that. However, we want to pay attention to asking whether the work is really suitable for real campaign, because that's really so important, right? Good. Now, for the peer feedback, when you watch or listen to other people's presentations, what I want you to do is to pay attention to the insights that they share that really impresses you. What are those cultural insights? Take note of them and let them form part of what you're going to be discussing during the feedback time. Now, how it should work is after every single presentation made, there should be time for the discussion so that there is sufficient time. Take as much time as you need to give robust feedback. And I'm going to have the assistant and his rep making notes or collating, doing a kind of summary of all of what every other person has done. And when it's time for the assistant and his rep and her rep to make their own presentations, others can volunteer to take note of what they have done as well. so that altogether the report will be put together and I'll see them. Now, in addition to the cultural insights that impressed you, I'd like you to pay attention to how the campaign can be even more effective. So, as you're watching, be thinking in your mind, I do think to my mind that if this had been done this way, positioned this way, definitely this would have made a far better impression. And then you get to share it, right? Then, what did you learn about advertising to different cultures? Yes. What did you learn? Share it. Also during the peer feedback. And that could help to improve the work that you're all doing. So at this point, you might want to pause the video presentation that I'm making here now and take the presentations one after the other. No group must be left out. Everyone must be involved. Let the groups determine how the presentation would be made. All right, because the group members are many, they might nominate up to 2 persons to make the presentation for them. So you can pause the video now and go ahead to do that. And I'll continue with the rest of the slides when you return. All right, welcome back. I hope that the presentations went so well. Of course, I'm going to have the chance to take a look at the presentations you made in class. But now, down to the business for this week. We said we're going to be talking about public relations and community engagement. Now, there are times that advertising goes wrong, right? And so we're going to be looking at from advertising to public relations, what happens when cultural miscommunication fails, right? There are examples of cultural missteps happening because maybe people haven't done due diligence before they undertook to do such advertisements. What are some of the examples? Number 1 there says that there could have been or there could be poor translation, which leads to offensive meanings. Yeah, so if people didn't know the thing of tone in local languages and they assumed that they knew the meaning of a word and then they misused it, of course, you know that can be a real problem. Imagine someone using a word that means entirely something different in another language or the target's language, then you know that they're in for big trouble. Right? So that could be a very big one. Another could be cultural stereotypes that anger communities. Many people don't like being stereotyped. I don't even think there's anyone on the planet Earth who does like it. So if people were trying to do advertisements and they did not show consideration for some of such stereotypes that are being spread around, then they could get into a lot of trouble with people accepting such advertisements. Again, maybe you want to pause the video and think about examples of such cultural stereotypes. And I think you should be able to think about them. But one that comes readily to mind is, people just making stereotypes about the Igbo people, for example, and say Igbo people like money too much. I don't know which tribe or race or ethnic group that doesn't like money in terms of working for money and getting it. Maybe they mean something different, but stereotyping means that you generalize and say something is true about a whole lot of people when maybe just a section of people that you've met. And then the question is, how many people really of this group of people have you met? Should you stereotype them? Then some people could talk about Yoruba and then they're using funny expressions about them. And I don't like to repeat such because I'm not Yoruba. I could talk about that of Igbo because I am. And I do hear it and it doesn't mean anything to me. So think about that. You could pause the video and let you all share what are some of those cultural stereotypes that you know that might anger communities, that if not carefully deployed, it shouldn't even be deployed at all, but if unknowingly used, or if care is not taken, communities might actually be angered if they were to watch such an advertisement. So pause and share. And then when you're back, we continue to look at some other things that can cause cultural missteps. And this would have to do with religious insensitivity, which could cause boycotts. In class the other time, I did share with us how big organizations in Nigeria, some time ago, in trying to make an advertisement of their products, or maybe not their products, but just in a bid to maybe show communality during a festive period, said heroes like Agege and stuff like that. Now that's a high level of religious insensitivity, because at such point in time, the point is that it's just not possible for people to throw away their religious beliefs, because it's obvious that their beliefs are being encroached on, or they are not being respected. And that's definitely a no-no for anybody who's listening to that. And advertisements, no matter the intentions or how laudable the projects are, if not considering religious issues, beliefs, will hit the rocks. Right? There's also the aspect of traditional authority disrespecting or being disrespected, right? If traditional authority is disrespected, it could lead to community rejection. Yes, people value their cultural systems, and an advertisement that looks down on what they believe in, what they've stood for all their lives, would never be accepted. So these are some of the things that can mar the efforts of advertisers in communities. As you take note of these things, begin to think about them. If you ever want to venture into marketing, you want to consider some of these things that could be a cultural misstep, leading to a lack of success in the venture that's being taken. Let's now look at the cost of cultural mistakes. Number one is lost sales in affected communities. Yes, the communities affected wouldn't want to buy. What are they buying? Something that's disrespectful to them, they would never indulge. That's a clear one. Number two, damaged reputation, which would require expensive repair. I did talk about how the CEO of those organizations would have to come out to hold a press conference, give a press briefing to apologize and say they didn't know about it and all of that. And at the end of the day, in order to make the public feel that they're sincerely genuine about their feelings, what do? They end up letting go some of these people who, chaired the production of those advertisements. So it's actually a big problem. And in some of those cases, for some of the banks involved, people began to withdraw their monies and said they were no longer going to bank with them because it was highly insensitive to their religious beliefs. Now that's a huge cost, don't you think? Again, there is the thing of employee relations problems with cultural communities. Yes, because if you look at it, people in such communities would find it offensive that an organization like this would put out this kind of advertisement. Maybe it was funny to them, but it's not funny to those in the community. So there would be strained relationships. People seeing those of the organization going to work in their community, there might even be some kind of mob protest or even mob attack. Yes, that could happen. There is also the case of regulatory issues in some regions. Yes, where regulatory bodies begin to ban some products or even the organization. You want to look at how advertising mistakes can actually cost a whole lot, not only to the organization but also to the people who may have been patronizing them before and who have perhaps grown some level of dependency on whatever their outputs are. So when issues like this happen, we say that that's where PR, that's public relations, and community engagement become essential. So how are the issues eventually resolved? Because there will always be conflict, and conflict is not in all contexts necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes when people think differently, it brings about conflict. But then there are both sides and there are good sides to conflict, because people have to learn to shift their positions, right? Or change their opinion. But again, knowing the things that might lead to bad kind of conflict, as professionals, we try to avoid such. All right? Let's move on now to talk about traditional conflict resolution. Now, we have to learn from how traditional community people or members resolve the internal problems that they have. How do they handle conflicts? Now, what is the traditional process? One, there is immediate acknowledgement. In the traditional setting, once a problem has been highlighted, there is no denial of it. There is no ignoring of it. They immediately acknowledge it. So that's one way that Indigenous language media teaches current professionals to resolve their conflicts. They don't have to ignore the problem or deny it. They have to just be upfront about it, accept it, and try to do something about it. That's one. On the other hand, they may have to show respect for authority, which is what happens traditionally. And how does that work? Traditional leaders, elders, the chiefs, the people that hold higher stakes in the community are all involved, are all invited to the resolution process so that they have to have a say, right? Then there is also community dialogue where everyone affected would have an opportunity to say their minds, to bear their minds, and to say how they feel about the situation. There's also the aspect of truth telling. People traditionally find a way to honestly opine their views, talk about what went wrong and how this can be resolved. But talking about how it can be resolved, there's a thing of collective solution. People all want to make something work. As a community, they decide, okay, going forward, this is how we're going to try to fix the problem. And at the end of the day, if everybody buys into the idea, there is what we call relationship restoration. And this is so impressive because at such point, it's not just a matter of healing for that time. It's healing for all time. Meaning, it's not just a temporary kind of fixing that is done. The focus is to make sure that going forward, that kind of thing doesn't repeat itself. So, having looked at the traditional process of immediate acknowledgement, respect for authority, community dialogue, truth-telling, collective solution, and restoration of the relationship, how can this be applied to modern PR? And that's what we're going to look at next. All right, so let's talk about applying what we have learned from traditional conflicts resolution to modern PR contexts. What this means is that there has to be crisis acknowledgement. Instead of burying the crisis or making it look like it never happened, there has to be an acknowledgement using culturally appropriate language. Like I mentioned, with the cases that happened some time ago in Nigeria, they had to really appeal to many organizations involved. For example, the Christian Association of Nigeria, to apologize for what happened. There also has to be some kind of stakeholder engagement. Now, take that back to involving people in position of authority, like the traditional rulers, the chiefs, and what have you. So have a stakeholder engagement. Traditional authorities can also still be a part of it because it's the communities that have been offended. A certain group of people may have been offended, so look for the major stakeholders of those communities represented and let them be part of the conversation. There should also be community meetings that follow the kind of consultation formats we've looked at from the point of view of the traditional process. Solution development with community input and ownership can also follow, where even those in the community affected can propose what they think that the solution could be. Or if the organization in question who has defaulted is proposing a solution, they want to do their background checks on the groundwork and ensure that they're going to be speaking the mind of the community. They're also going to be speaking to their minds, and with that way, resolution would be in place. Now, is it necessary for companies to apologize when there is a crisis? Let's take a look. Yes, companies need to apologize to communities, and that's because there has to be an effective handling of cultural crises. There has to be effective communication also to make this happen. Attention would then have to be paid to the language and tone. Mother tongue communication would be the best. So even if not a lot of people in the organization know how to speak the mother tongue of those who have been affected, they want to go and engage a professional who knows how to speak the language, share the context, and let them know everything that has gone wrong, and let them be the ones to mediate. Speak the language of the people, because the language of the people is the language of the heart. But then, respectful language has to be used, and this has to follow cultural politeness patterns. Do some research, find out how people in that culture show politeness, and extract what you can in order to make it work. The tone should be humble because offense has been caused, right? So there has to be that acknowledging of the harm caused, and there has to be that accepting of responsibility and promising to right the wrong. Again, research has to come in because there are metaphors that the community understands. So why not share those cultural metaphors that they understand and appreciate, and that tells them that this organization has done a lot to make sure that everything would work out right. Okay? All right, let's now also move on and now talk about the process and the protocol. Now, for this, the traditional authority consultation happens before public statements. They have to go and make some kind of consultation with the traditional authority before they make public statements. It's important, otherwise, if the traditional authorities feel like they've been neglected or looked down upon, it will take a lot of time for that kind of situation to be ameliorated. Again, they want to adopt community meeting format for direct dialogue. How did these people in their community have meetings? Adopt the same also for direct dialogue. Elder mediation for neutral guidance is also important. Sometimes you have to look for the elders in the community to solve such kind of problems, and there has to be patience with traditional decision making timing because they might not give their own go ahead or support at the first meeting. They might say, oh, we have to have another meeting, maybe because of the meats and the drinks and all, but that's an aside. But there has to be a lot of patience shown. And what should be the focus in terms of proffering solutions? Focus on how the community would benefit. How will they be helped? How can the wrongs be made right? What can the organization also learn from working with the traditional people? And instead of just a quick fix, what's the long-term relationship commitment that's being made? Think about it from that angle, and they would see that there's a lot of commitment to making things better. Cultural protocol respect and ongoing engagement is also important. Respect should be given to whom honor is due, so that they are also happy to engage with you. So that's how it is. And we're just going to move on now to our workshop. Having taken note of all of this, we're going to have a workshop. And for one of the sessions, we're going to do a community relations crisis. And I've given you here a scenario. And the scenario is that a telecommunications company's new tower is affecting a community's traditional ceremonial ground. Community members are protesting and threatening to boycott. So we're going to have people from the different groups take on the different role assignments. The company PR team would comprise of 4 students. We'll have groups 1 and 2, giving us 2 members each to form the company's PR team. Then we have the traditional community leaders. We're also going to have 2 from group 3 and 2 from group 4 as traditional community leaders. Community members, we're also going to have another 4 members we now have groups 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 2 from group 5 and 2 from group 6. This can be voluntary, okay? Media representatives, let's now have 1 student will start all over from group 1 and 1 from group 2 to serve as the media representatives. I hope that we get this. Company PR team, group 1 and 2. Groups 1 and 2 give us 2 students each. Traditional community leaders, we have 2 each from groups 3 and 4. Community members, we have 2 each from 5 and 6. And media representatives, we have 1 each from groups 1 and 2 again. You can pause the video and make the selections now so that as you move to the next slide, you're going to understand what's to happen. Okay, so now these are the task rounds. What's going to happen? You're going to spend 15 minutes preparing a response. That's the company. And it's going to be a crisis response planning. Crisis response planning for 15 minutes. There's also going to be a community meeting simulation. A simulation means now come together as though you now want to resolve the issue. You can come up with, based on the scenario that I've raised, come up with a simulation of having a community meeting. So here all the groups will interact. And for the next 10 minutes, there should be a solution development. Try to negotiate resolution. And let's see, if somebody can record, please, this entire workshop, how the whole resolution was negotiated. Part of the questions that you might be asking when you begin to discuss the entire workshop or presentation done by these people would be, what are the communication strategies that worked best as they had this interaction or simulation? How did cultural knowledge affect the negotiation? And what would you do differently in a real situation? Now, take note of these 3 questions and you're going to come back to it at the end of the presentation, and that would be it. So I'm going to, at this point, ask you to pause so that all of the planning can happen, then the interaction and the negotiation of the resolution, and then you come back to have your discussion. Afterwards, you can move on to the next slide by continuing to play, and we talk about practical PR writing skills. All right, we're here now at practical PR writing skills, and this is for you to be able to share a press release in Nigerian languages. Question is, what's the structure for cultural media? Now, you start with a cultural greeting. That's any appropriate opening for the community that they appreciate. Recognize traditional authority by giving them the acknowledgement that is due them. share clear information as to what happened and why it does matter, and show how the people would benefit by having this talked about. What's the contact information? There has to be a culturally appropriate follow-up that would happen. Now, this is for your writing, so you need to take note of all of this. Next, we look at the language considerations. There has to be professional but accessible language. It doesn't have to be too formal, neither does it have to be too casual, right? Or just keep it there, midpoint, but professional. As per cultural terminology, take note of terms that are used for leaders. They have to be respectable terms. Take note of the places too and how they are being referenced. Connect to community interest and values. That is, let them know how this is relevant to them locally. There also has to be an inclusion of action orientation. That is, what are the clear next steps for this community? That's all of these you have to talk about, but pay attention to the language used so that you are achieving the goals that you intend to achieve. Now, what's the distribution strategy? Normally, we would have briefing first with the traditional authority before we then move on to local language radio stations, because those in authority shouldn't be hearing from a radio station and you haven't had a one-on-one with them. They also can then proceed to be community bulletins, which will be pasted on their boards. It could also extend to having religious institution newsletters where the information can filter down to religious houses. Social media can also work, because who wouldn't even use it at a time like this? A lot of things get blown out of proportion on social media, so it's important that you're using the right language also when talking about this matter on social media. So this is what you have to do, and in the next slide I'm going to talk to you about your homework assignment, what it is that you have to do. Now, you can also work in groups for your homework so that it makes it much easier for you to get this done well. Now, this is your homework assignment. It's going to be a community relations strategy project. You're going to create a comprehensive community engagement plan. And here is the scenario. A Nigerian bank wants to open a new branch in a traditional community. You're going to design a communication strategy that builds trust and support. That's it. So be creative about it and show how you're going to make this work. What are your deliverables? 1, a community research. Just 300 words. Let it incorporate the cultural values, communication patterns, and show who the key stakeholders are that need to be talked with. Second, what's your engagement strategy? In 400 words, tell us how you're going to approach and build relationships with the people in the community. And in 300 words, tell us about your crisis prevention plan. What are the potential problems that you foresee and how are you going to try to avoid them? In all, not more than 2 pages, right? So let me show you some sample materials and the evaluation focus so you know if you're on track. Right, so you're going to choose to do a press release in Indigenous language, or community meeting presentation outline, traditional authority consultation letter, or radio advertisement script. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to choose from all of this. For each group, I am going to insist on this one, like minutes for you to choose one. And do not choose more than one. Just take one out of it, okay? Yes, just one. Any of them works just fine, but make sure that all the things that we're looking for are embedded in it. The focus for the evaluation are the following. We're going to be looking out for your deployment or your knowledge and understanding of cultural sensitivity and accuracy, considering the scenario that we just painted. Strategic thinking about relationship building, we want to see that play out. Professional quality of the materials that you're going to be putting together. Practical applicability, how practical is it for this to be applicable or applied? And that'll be it, and we'll see how you go about this. If you have questions or if there's lack of clarity, you want more clarity, please feel free to send an email to me or send your course rep or his assistant to come to me to have a conversation about this. But I do hope that you find this useful. Well, you just try and do the best that you can. And if there are any questions, feel free to send me a personal email or send through your class rep. Thank you for listening, and if there's any question already, I told you what to do. So see you when I come your way next week. And remember that our first CA is in week 7. So this is week 5 already, meaning we have 2 weeks to our first CA. So thank you and have a good day. Bye.